Hello, everyone. Welcome to ACRO's Education in Crisis series and today's webinar on Lebanon. I am Julia Funaki, Associate Director at ACRO, and I'd like to introduce a couple of my colleagues here. Dr. Hala Abu Araj is the Associate Registrar at the American University of Beirut, where she joins us from, and we'd like to thank her for taking the time and extending her day to be on this webinar with us. And also Annetta Stroud, my colleague at ACRO, Associate Director of Content and Curriculum. Welcome to both of you, and we're hoping for Vanessa to join us soon, but we're not sure about that. So we've had some technical difficulties and we'll see how that goes. So let me begin by saying that this is a Zoom webinar. And with Zoom webinar, you are muted and your cameras are off. Our intent is to let the presenters share their content and then take questions at the end. And to facilitate that, we ask that you please put any questions you might have into the Q&A box. And then we can sort through those and go through your questions as needed. So let's go ahead and start the presentation without further ado. Annetta?
Great, thank you, Julia, so much. And thanks everyone for joining us today for our update on Lebanon. In today's session, we will be providing an overview of Lebanon, including the geography, including the language and religion, including living conditions. We will also be going over the education structure of Lebanon and best practices and document review for admissions to higher education. And we will also be discussing the current state of education. We will end, as Julia said, with some time for Q&A. And so definitely we appreciate going ahead and putting all of the questions into the Q&A box. And with that, I would like to turn it over to Hala.
Hello, everyone. So I will start with an overview of Lebanon with the geography, language, and religion, and the living conditions in the pre-war, post-war, and the current condition. So Lebanon is a small country in the Middle East along the eastern shore of the Mediterranean Sea. The area of Lebanon is 10,452 square kilometers. Lebanon's role in the region was shaped by trade. On the one hand, it serves as the link between the Mediterranean world and India and East Asia. And on the other hand, because Lebanon straddles the northwest of the Arabian Plate, it is sometimes geopolitically grouped together with nations with adjacent tectonic approximations such as Syria, Yemen, Oman, Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, and Egypt. Lebanon has a Mediterranean climate characterized by 4 seasons, a long, hot, and dry summer, and a cool, rainy winter. Fall is a transitional season with a lowering of temperatures and little rain. Spring occurs when the winter rains cause the vegetation to revive. Lebanon shares many cultural characteristics of the Arab world, yet the Western influence, especially of France, is apparent, of course, because of the French colonialism. Lebanon has a heterogeneous society composed of numerous ethnic, religious, and kinship groups. Ethnically, the Lebanese compose a mixture in which Phoenician, Greek, Armenian, and Arab elements are discernible. Arabic is the official language. French and English are also widely spoken. They are widely spoken between people, and of course, they are taught in schools and universities. Actually, most of the subjects, math, natural sciences, they are taught either in French and English. It is worth noting that smaller proportions of the population are Armenian and Kurdish speaking. Lebanon is mostly composed of Christians and Muslims. Unlike the neighboring Arab countries where Muslims constitute the majority, the political system, the political power is shared equally between Muslims and Christians. I would like to say that, unfortunately, there has been no official census in the country since 1932. Now I'm going to start with the living conditions, the pre-war living conditions. Lebanon enjoyed a prosperity in the 50s and 60s of the last decade. Institutions were established under the governance of President Fouad Shihab. However, and due to the sectarian nature of the country, disparities between the different sects as well as between the city and rural areas increased, especially in agriculture, and led to a lack of services. While no comprehensive surveys exist to help evaluate the actual accomplishments during this period, there are some contributions by a number of researchers who concur in indicating that some success was achieved, especially with respect to laying the foundations of the emergence and expansion of a middle class, and in emphasizing the role of which expansion of education, especially public education, played as a vehicle for social and career advancement. During the 60s, many reforms to decrease regional and social disparities succeeded partially in improving the living standards and the quality of life in rural areas. During this period, education played a distinctive role in promoting upward social mobility. However, disparities in educational attainment between urban and rural regions remained strong due to many reasons, where there was a distorted urbanization at the expense of rural areas. And this is typical of all underdeveloped countries, such as Lebanon. These improvements were not sufficient actually to remove disparities, but actually they were one cause of the ignition of war. After the Civil War, the magnitude of poverty increased. The distribution of income after the war came to resemble that which prevailed at the beginning of the 1960s, with the share of the intermediate and high income categories shrinking in favor of the low income categories. As of September 2019, approximately 1.5 million Syrian refugees reside in Lebanon. Of course, this is because of the Syrian civil war. Lebanon continues to face major challenges to food and water security. The refugee situation placed tremendous pressure on the country's resources, especially the water availability and agricultural production. Water scarcity affects the quality and quantity of water available to the villages, food security, and land availability for living and for cultivating. I would say that the influx of Syrian refugees is not something the Lebanese government could have reasonably prepared for, as it happened so rapidly. But even international aid has proven to be inadequate for the scale of the crisis. Of course, this is especially in the Bekaa and northern Lebanon region, which borders closely with Syria. Arrivals of refugees to Lebanon grew at an unprecedented pace in between 2013 and 2014, with an average of 47,000 refugees being registered by UNHCR per month. By the beginning of 2015, there were an estimated 1.3 million Syrian refugees living in Lebanon. As their displacement extends and their savings deplete, refugees' socioeconomic vulnerability increases. And there's another important problem is that it's related to the Syrian refugees who were born in Lebanon, and they are at an increased risk, as 72% of them do not possess official birth certificates because they cannot go back to Syria to get their official documents. The majority of refugees have settled in the Bekaa region. And because of this influx, not only has Lebanon suffered on a basis of resources and environmental stress, but also suffered economically through a loss of trade, tourism, and investment. And according to the World Bank, the GPE, the country's GPE, Lebanon's GDP, plunged from 10% before the crisis to 2% after the crisis. I would say that this is only one part of the problem. Another part of the problem is related to the devaluation of the currency in Lebanon at the moment, which is really causing around 70% of the population, of the Lebanese population, to be jobless. Next slide, please. I'm going to turn it to Anata now.
Great. Thank you so much, Hala, for the current overview and a general overview of Lebanon and some of its current issues. We would like to take the next section for discussing the education sector. In this section, we will be looking at the historical context of education, the education structure, including the primary, secondary cycle and the higher education cycle, as well as best practices when evaluating documents for admission to higher education. And so with that, let's go ahead and take a look at the historical context. So it is really important to provide a bit of context when beginning to understand the Lebanese education system because it is so very, very rich. As Hala mentioned, Lebanon has been shaped by many different cultures, including Phoenician, Arabic, Armenian, Greek, Roman, Muslim, French, American, and Jewish. I mean, just to name a few, right? Just to name a few. And so basically it is a very, very, very rich, rich culture. So let's just take a step back in history to the Ottoman rule. So during the Ottoman rule, the ethnic and religious groups in society pretty much followed their own communal affairs, which also included providing education to their constituents. Although there was no standardized education system within each of these groups, each one of these cultural and religious groups, minorities, the Ottoman Empire was absolutely supportive of education being delivered through and by each group, which really led to a thriving education and social structure that we really can see today in both the secondary and the higher education sector in Lebanon. So basically towards the end of the 18th century, Western missionaries began arriving in Lebanon in droves. And in an effort to support their own religious goals, many began to open schools and universities, just as missionaries around the world have done in history, right? So it's definitely no different in Lebanon. So the French Jesuits were really the first to open up schools, which would be considered primary, secondary, non-tertiary education. So the French Jesuits were really the first to open schools, followed by American Protestants, and then followed by the Al-Maqsid institution that provides education for Muslim children. In 1866, the American Protestants established the first university, the Syrian Protestant College, which actually today is the American University of Beirut, where Hala is joining us from. The French Jesuits, but of course, wasted no time and established Lebanon's second university, Université Saint-Youssef, in 1875. So already we're really seeing the education sector really start to get feet in Lebanon. So let's just fast forward a couple of decades now. At the end of World War I, Lebanon was mandated to the French, who controlled the country from 1920 to 1943 when Lebanon gained its independence. In 1926, during the French mandate, Lebanon was declared a republic and a constitution was implemented. This constitution also, among other things, outlined the structure for secondary education. French was recognized as an official language along with Arabic, and the secondary education system was then in Lebanon modeled to the French pattern, and this is when the baccalaureate examination was introduced. And some of these characteristics of the French model that was implemented, we absolutely will still see today, especially at that secondary level. When Lebanon gained independence in 1943, Arabic was recognized as the only official language. Although that was the case, the French secondary system was absolutely adopted, although the curriculum was changed a little bit in terms that Arabic was deemed a compulsory language, as compulsory subject to be taught, and more focus was placed on Lebanese culture and history prior to 1943. Than focusing on French culture and history. So in 1943, those were the major changes to the French curriculum that we now see as part of the Lebanese national curriculum at the secondary level. In 1951, English was recognized as a primary foreign language, as was French at that time. And in Beirut and Tripoli, the first two public schools opened. And this effectively established the secondary's public school system. So basically after 1951, this is where we're really going to see public education come right in line with that private education that we have seen in Lebanon since really when the Ottomans were ruling. So again, as in 51, we're really going to see now public education really come into play. So with the Lebanese curriculum is taught both at private and public schools in Lebanon at the elementary through upper secondary levels. So definitely keep that in mind. Now, before I turn to the next slide, we do have a couple more dots on our timeline. This is really just to highlight that as Hala mentioned, there were some really good decades when Lebanon was really flourishing. I mean, the Paris of the Middle East, right? But unfortunately, in the late 50s, moving into definitely the 70s through the 2000s, there has been so much conflict in Lebanon that so much has really been decimated. And the education sector, though not decimated, has definitely been impacted by all of the cultural strife and crises that have happened over the past couple of decades. So we have provided a little bit of context, which is definitely important for Lebanon. So let's just go ahead and take a minute to look at the education structure. So all education at all levels in Lebanon is regulated by the Ministry of Education and Higher Education. Within this one ministry, we have the Directorate General of Education, which oversees primary, intermediate, and secondary levels. We have the Directorate General of Higher Education, which oversees obviously higher education. We also have the Directorate General of Technical and Vocational Education, which oversees all the TVET programming, which you will see on the right-hand side of our education ladder. So not surprising, the educational system of Lebanon closely models the French, especially we will see this through the entire educational system. We will see many characteristics of the French system. Let's go ahead and look at the primary, intermediate, and secondary levels. So basically one of the characteristics that we will also see as part of the French system is the idea of cycles, of cycles. And so when we're looking at the secondary education structure, in the very first basic education or elementary level, we have 2 cycles, each 3 years, which total 6 years. This is going to be your compulsory education in Lebanon from grades 1 through 6. Upon successful completion of this elementary level, individuals can then go on to the next cycle, and study for the Beirut d'études, which is 3 years in length, and again culminates in the external examination of the brevet. The next cycle is going to be your upper secondary level or your secondary level. This cycle is also going to be 3 years. At this point, individuals can either continue on the academic track or go ahead and move into their technical secondary education. Upon completion of the 3 years in the pardon, I'm getting tongue-tied. Upon completion of the 3-year cycle at the secondary level, students will sit the external examination of the baccalaureate. In this case, you're either going to sit for the baccalaureate Lebanese or the baccalaureate technique, both of which allow access to tertiary education. Okay, so upon successful completion of your bac and successful completion of your examination and passing of that, you are able to access higher education. So higher education in Lebanon is super interesting and can get a little bit kind of tricky because just like in our primary and secondary cycle, we see really heavy influence of the French system. We absolutely will see that at the secondary level. We will also see a very heavily influenced university modeled off the American cycle. So really what that means is that you're going to have 2 types of undergraduate level studies. You're going to have one that follows the French system, which is your LMD structure, which is a licence, master, doctor. And then you're going to have the American system, which is the bachelor, master, doctor structure. The main difference, of course, between the two is that the French licence, which is your first tier 1 in the higher education cycle, is going to be 3 years. So for your French licence, you have 3 years. And as we probably know, for the American bachelor, we're usually looking at 4 years. So within the higher education structure of Lebanon at the undergraduate level, we do have both French-styled licence degrees, and we also have American-styled bachelor degrees. And we'll talk about that a little more in detail with Hala once we move through this. Regardless, so for both the bachelor or the proper licence, you absolutely need to have a bachelor degree or its equivalent to access tertiary education in Lebanon. Just as we have seen in other countries, we have a 2-year master, which is then followed by your 3+ year for your doctoral level studies. And so in general, this is just an overview of the education system in Lebanon. And we will look at this all in more detail in one of the next sections. Grading scale in Lebanese. Surprise, surprise. This is really the French system. This is the French grading system. It's on the 20-point scale. Of course, because we also have institutions and universities that follow the American model, we do have American-styled grading systems as well. So of course, best practice is always to look to the school and to your documents that have been presented to you from the institution to determine what proper scale you want to be using when evaluating your records. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Julia, who can tell us about some secondary education.
Great, thanks, Annetta. So secondary or upper secondary in Lebanon is 3 years in duration, and it's entered after the passing of the brevet examination in the intermediate cycle. The first year, common for all students, and the second year is either scientific or literature, whereas the third year comprises humanities, economics, life sciences, or general sciences. Those are each their own component. Most schools, however, have deviated from that system, and they usually do not offer the humanities education, citing that the economics is a better and more efficient alternative. School administrations decide students' path based on the student's aptitude, as shown by the first secondary and second secondary years. When students complete these 3 years of education, they take that official Lebanese baccalaureate exam in their respective tracks. So those 4 tracks of humanities, economics, life sciences, and general sciences. Students who finish those exams successfully obtain the Lebanese Baccalaureate Certificate of Secondary Education. I will not try to say that in the indigenous language, or the Technical Baccalaureate as well. And we have samples of each. In addition to the public and private schools teaching the national Lebanese curriculum, there are also many private schools offering different international curriculums, including the French, which of course culminates in the award of the French Baccalaureate. There are American schools that offer the U.S. High School Diploma Program, and there are schools teaching the international baccalaureate programs, obviously culminating in the International Baccalaureate. The Lebanese Baccalaureate is considered equivalent to the French Baccalaureate, the IB diploma, and the American High School Diploma in Lebanon. According to Reuters, in July 2021, the private schools made up 70% of the education sector. So here is an example of the Lebanese Bach. You'll see in the upper right corner, the seal of the Ministry of Education and Higher Education with the candidate's name, year, and place of birth, and with the year of the examination highlighted in that red box. Could you go on to the next slide, Annetta? Hang on, let me do this in case, yes, thank you. The year of the examination in this record is 2019, which you might be able to decipher that using your handy decoder ring or your numerals of the Lebanese numerals, the Arabic numerals into what you are used to. So pick out that 2019. The list of courses examined are listed on the right side of this document. So as we know in Arabic, right to left. So the middle column states the grade earned, and the last column states the maximum grade possible for the course. The two highlighted boxes below are the final grade for the candidate and the total possible grade for that examination. On the bottom left corner, highlighted in the box is the date of issue. In this case, that date is July 23rd, 2019. And you can see that the possible grades, and so this is what I love to do, and I think most credential evaluators like to do. They like to use this as just an exercise for them to get used to these numbers. So if you look at those total grades possible, that box towards the bottom where there are two boxes side by side, to pick out the 570 and then to pick out the 429. All right, so just a little exercise for you. Next slide. All right, as mentioned previously, it's very common in Lebanon for individuals to study outside of the national Lebanese curriculum. Here's an example of the relève de notes for the French Bach. We can see that the candidate studied at the Lycée Franco-Liban Beirut and that it carries the seal of the ambassador of France to Lebanon. So that red box shows you that that's actually where they studied. Okay, let's go ahead to the next slide. And this slide here, as I said earlier, we would give you an example of a technical baccalaureate, and here it is for you as well. And you see the date is highlighted there towards the bottom, and that this was done in 2005. So hopefully these are useful for you in your toolbox, and we'll go on to the next slide, and I'm going to go ahead and turn it back over to Hala.
Okay, so I'm gonna talk now about the higher education system. So the education system in Lebanon in general has been influenced by Arabic, French, and American education models. And this becomes very clear when we look at university level study in Lebanon. Higher education in Lebanon is based on 3 cycles. As my colleagues just said, the L, licence, stands for licence, M for master, and D for doctor in the French model, and of course, which is equivalent to the bachelor, master, doctoral progression in the American model. In the French modeled programs, you have a 3-year bachelor degree, followed by a 2-year master program and a minimum of 3 years of for the doctoral studies. In the American system, you have the traditional 4-year bachelor's degree as students enter the university at the freshman program, followed by a 2-year master degree, and of course a minimum of 3+ doctoral degrees. Next slide, please. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about the admission to universities. No, sorry, it's my mistake. I should have. Admission to universities in Lebanon is based on the Lebanese Baccalaureate Part 2 or its equivalent. Holders of the Lebanese Baccalaureate receive 30 credits when matriculating into American-styled universities that lead to a bachelor's degree, which is basically the equivalent of the freshman year. Students who have the Lebanese baccalaureate, they do not go into the freshman program. They enter the sophomore program, and they have a 30 credit of freshman courses transferred, and it's apparent on their transcript. However, holders of the Lebanese baccalaureate applying to French-styled universities matriculate into year one of the 3-year licence program. This can be a bit problematic, as it can appear that a 4-year American-styled bachelor's degree is in fact a 3-year program, where in fact, as I said, it is a 4-year bachelor's program completed in 3 years. Depending on the institution, in addition to the benchmark credentials listed, additional requirements may be requested from the individual higher education institution. Normally for the American styled universities, SAT-1 and SAT-2 is a must for students who wants to go into freshman, and SAT-1 is in addition, of course, to the school grades, and SAT-1 also is a must. Now with the cancellation of the SAT-2 throughout the world, and the ministry is discussing other options for SAT-1. Next slide, please. Lebanon has 42 nationally accredited universities, several of which are internationally recognized. The American University of Beirut, AUB, and the Université Saint-Joseph, USG, were the first Anglophone and the first Francophone universities to open in Lebanon. The majority of the 42 universities, mainly they are private universities. We have only one university, the Lebanese University, which is a public university. It's the sole public university in Lebanon. The language of instruction is basically French or English. As I said, the Lebanese University is the only public university, and in 2016, NOFIC reported that 39% of all Lebanese students attend the Lebanese university. 2 American institutions, actually there are more than 2 American institutions which are accredited in the United States. AUB is accredited by the Middle States, LAU is accredited by Nietzsche. We have at least 7 or more 7 universities in Lebanon which have international accreditation either in the United States or in Europe, supporting the international education cooperation between Lebanon and other countries. Now I'll turn it over to Aneta to look at some sample documents.
Great, thank you so much, Hala, for that background information on the higher education system and some of its possible complications for American admissions officials. So let's go ahead and take a look at a couple of documents. So here's the degree certificate for the Bachelor of Science in Medical Laboratory Sciences awarded by the University of Beirut in June 2015. You can see that it is actually a dual language document and that it is a copy attested by the Registrar's Office. Now, as we discussed earlier, higher education in Lebanon is influenced by Arabic, French, and American models. And oh my goodness, we see this represented in both the language and the style of records from institutions, as well as in the nomenclature for degree programs and translations. For example, some French-styled universities that follow the licence master doctor's structure may actually call the licence that is awarded a bachelor's degree and not a licence, which can be kind of confusing for admissions officers here in the state. So we do want to be aware of that. And because of course, when we call something a bachelor's degree, maybe sometimes we're automatically thinking that is a traditionally 4-year degree, whereas the licence degrees are 3. So again, it is always important to read the transcript and confirm with the university's website for the program duration. So we went ahead and did our due diligence and looking up the program information on the University of Balaman's website. And we do know that the program is 3 years in length following the Lebanese bac. And so hopefully we'll see this represented in the transcript. So let's keep that in mind. It's going to be a 3-year program following the Lebanese baccalaureate. So here's the transcript from the Bachelor of Science from the University of Balaman. A couple of things here to note that is definitely interesting that we really do like to see on many of transcripts that come out of Lebanon is that we really do like to, give me just a second here, I apologize. We really do like to see that the entry credential that the holder carries to access the actual program. So for the entry credential to the Bachelor of Science program in this case was the Lebanese Baccalaureate in the Life Sciences stream. Now, as we can see here, the first piece of our the first year of credit we can see was actually transfer credits accepted from the Lebanese Baccalaureate. So what this is going to mean is that although it's a 3-year program following the French bac, it really does mean that this is a 4-year undergraduate level program of study that we would consider to be comparable to 4 years of undergraduate level study in the United States as well. So even though it says it's a 3-year program, it really is including that 1 year of transfer credit or advanced standing credit for the Lebanese bac. It definitely is good to know that by law, the Lebanese bac absolutely must transfer in 30 units for that first year for an American styled 4-year bachelor's degree program. So definitely keep that in mind. As you can see, this transcript is really styled off an American styled transcript, which is really great for us. It lists all of our courses taken by semester and even the summer course load as well. We will see that this student took 4 complete years past the bac to complete, which is fine because we can see that there were some withdrawals and that there are definitely courses that have been retaken through different semesters. So when we do see this, although it looks like a complete 4-year program, the student actually has 5 years worth of undergraduate level study because of that first year with the bac and then repeating of courses. On the very last page of our transcript, we can see all the normal things that we would see in a US transcript. We have total credits that were transferred. We have total institutional credits. We also have your overall GPA as well in your overall average. On the last page, always really super important, making sure that we do scan this in when you receive them is going to be your grading key. And then this is what the institution is using. So always making sure that we are using the institution's indigenous grading scale is a must. All right, let's just take another example and look through a different set of documents. Here we are seeing a diplôme d'ingénieur from the Université Saint-Joseph, and we can see that in this case we have a French and Arabic language documents. Very similar to what we saw earlier, except we were looking at an English and French document, an English and Arabic document. So we do see these dual language degree certificates, and that is absolutely great. Sometimes we will also see only issued in English. That is fine too. So basically, depending on the institution, you will see your records coming in different types of formats. Again, for example, Université Saint-Joseph was the first French-styled university to be established in Lebanon, and it absolutely follows what you would expect to see from a French institution in France. We can see that for the first year, we have your relève de notes, which constitutes all of the coursework that were taken for semester 1 and semester 2 for year 1, and then semester 1 and semester 2 for year 2. And then the next slide for your reference is just going to be the translation of the two sets of relève de notes. So the point is that in Lebanon, higher education is definitely an interesting thing. So make sure that you are clear if you're working from a French 3-year licence program or you're working with a 4-year American-styled bachelor's program. And with that, I would like to go ahead and turn it over to Vanessa to speak to the current state of education for refugees. And before we do that, we would like to introduce Vanessa, who came on a little bit late today. She is our Education USA advisor for Lebanon. Thank you so much for joining us, Vanessa. Welcome and glad to have you.
Thank you, Anita, for the introduction. Hi, everyone. So you might have heard about the current situation in Lebanon. We will be talking about the different challenges that we are currently facing, but allow me to talk first about the refugees. Lebanon has now for some time, we have been witnessing a series of intense political, economic, financial, monetary, and health crises, which have only been aggravated by the explosion of Beirut Port, what that happened on the August 4th. It has resulted in huge human and financial losses. So among the sectors affected by the situation, it was the educational sector with its various components, the higher education, public education, and the vocational education. So the Syrian crisis, it has placed a huge burden on the Lebanese public schools. There are nearly 400,000 school-age refugee children in Lebanon. So that is about roughly 25% of the Lebanese students in Lebanese public schools. So currently the public schools in Lebanon are hosting the majority of the Syrian refugees. In addition to barriers to access and other challenges, a significant barrier to integration is actually language. So the Syrian schools are taught in Arabic, while Lebanese public schools, they incorporate either French or English or even both. So in 2014, 104,000 Syrian refugee students were taught in Lebanese schools. And also in 2015, the Ministry of Education and Higher Education aimed to double the number of Syrian children in public schools up to 200,000 students. So all of these challenges are a barrier to the Lebanese public schools. As Education USA, we work with all local students, whether Lebanese, Syrian, or even Palestinian refugees. We have collaborated with the Ministry of Education and Higher Education to visit as much public schools as we can. We even incorporated different career coaching sessions as well as promoting the US higher education. We have also worked on several scholarship programs to support underprivileged Lebanese students, such as the Diana Kamal Scholarship Search Fund or the Hope Fund program, which is for Palestinian refugees. And currently we are working on a new scholarship program that targets the Syrian refugees. So this is for the refugee challenge. Hala, do you want to talk more about the political challenge?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Vanessa. I'm going to talk about the political challenges, the economic challenges, health challenges, and security challenges that the educational system is facing in Lebanon. And I'm going to start with the political challenges. So the unpredictability of the political system in Lebanon is creating a major problem to service delivery in general and to the education sector in particular. The cabinet has been formed after 1 year of void. Even though the cabinet is formed, it remains inactive and unable to take decisions due to the political segmentation and political dichotomy and political polarization of the various political factions in the country. This is leading to a status quo in issuing decrees for new programs in higher education, which is prohibiting the progress of those higher education institutions. Many children in Lebanon have been out of school since October 2019, when protests and civil unrest affected many parts of the country. And this is before COVID. The same year saw multiple teacher strikes over delayed salary payments, further disrupting learning. And the teacher strikes are still ongoing, by the way, for teachers in schools as well as in higher education. The learning crisis was further compounded by a currency collapse and the Beirut Port Explosion, as well as the COVID-19 lockdown measures. And now I'm gonna jump to the economic challenges. Schools and universities opened again at the start of this year amidst a severe economic crisis, a fuel shortage, and an electricity blackout. Higher education institutions are under the burden of the financial crisis and the devaluation of the national currency that was pegged to the dollar, thus making the consumer powerless and unable, and the goods are less affordable. Most universities suspended travel requests for faculty and staff in order to relieve the budget. The electricity blackout is causing extra financial burden put on fuel purchase and reliance on private generators now that the Électricité du Liban is supporting electricity with 1 hour of electricity. There's only 1 hour of electricity supported by the government, and the 23 hours of electricity are supported through private generators, of course, which need fuel to work, and the fuel is scarce. It was scarce, and then the fuel now is very, very, very expensive. The unavailability of gas and fuel is making commute to universities and schools very hard, adding to this being very expensive with the lack of public transportation in the country. This is adding an additional burden on students and their families, on faculty, on staff. Another important issue is the migration of faculty and staff members during the 2021, the year 2021, and it is still ongoing. Migration to the Gulf, to Europe, and to the state is draining the country and higher education from intellectuals. Migration reached its peak after the port blast, which damaged most higher education institutions in Beirut, as well as libraries and schools. The Lebanese University, which is the sole public university in Lebanon, and which hosts around 80,000 students, is facing many challenges. The academic year 2021-22 has not started yet due to the strikes, to teacher strikes, whose payroll has become quite insignificant amidst inflation. The lack of gasoline and fuel is making also hard to function the different parts of the university. Now I'm gonna talk about the health challenges. Of course, since the pandemic, more than 1.2 million children in Lebanon have been out of school. Over the past COVID-19 year, Lebanese children have received an estimated maximum of 11 weeks of education, with an even lower number of weeks in schools for hosting Syrian children. This is according to Save the Children new report. The COVID situation is more or less lessening now, especially with the increased vaccination campaigns all over Lebanon. However, we remain vigilant in monitoring COVID cases, since an increase in those cases in the country will lead to a health collapse of hospitals, as the medical staff is decreasing due to, as I said, to the migration of resources, of human resources, and medication and medical equipment are scarce in the country. The health collapse started after the port blast, where hospitals had to cater for more than 1,000 injuries amidst COVID. And finally, political instability of the country led to security challenges, which remain in force and are apparent every single day through either individual shootings or clashes on a wider scale between the different political factions. Similar to what happened in October, if you can go to the next slide, please. Where this is this is from the port blast. As you can see, schools are schools are deteriorated and destroyed. And on the right, you can see this was a library. This was the most important library in Beirut, and it was shattered. And some of those schools are still suffering from the aftermath of the blast, and they are not fully operational. And if you can go to the next slide, please. Here are some photos about the shooting, the clashes that took place in October, and students were in their classes, and you can see that they are hiding under their desks. It was really a trauma, and they are hiding in the corridors. And schools have been were evacuated, and really this security, those security issues will remain in force as long as the political unrest is present. And now I'm gonna hand it to Vanessa to talk a little bit about Education USA.
Yes, thank you, Hala. So some of you might already be familiar with Education USA, and it's so great to see so many familiar virtual faces again. But allow me to briefly introduce Education USA. So Education USA is a US Department of State network of over 400 international student advising centers in more than 175 countries. Education USA is officially a branch in the Office of Global Educational Programs in the Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs. The network promotes the US higher education to students around the world by offering accurate, comprehensive, and current information about different opportunities to study at accredited US higher institutions. In Lebanon, we are hosted by Amadeus, which is a nonprofit American organization. We are currently offering our services virtually due to COVID and the security reasons in Beirut. But however, we remain free to all students, so everyone can benefit from our free services, which also makes it easier to connect with more US universities, and it gives us an opportunity to reach out to more local students as well. So as advisors, we offer a wide range of virtual services to students, their families, based on our 5-step study guide, which usually it guides the students to navigate through the US higher education application process, because sometimes it can get confusing and complicated. The 5 steps are: research your options, finance your studies, complete your application, apply for the student visa, and finally prepare the students for the pre-departure before they arrive to the US. We also provide information on different topics, and this includes the admission process, standardized testing requirements such as the SAT, the GRE, the GMAT. We also offer topics on how to finance a US education, the student visa process, and preparing the students for the departure to the United States. We also provide services to the US higher education community to help institutional leaders and admission officers meet their recruitment and campus internationalization goals. We support the international student recruitment and your efforts for all the accredited US higher education institutions. We also offer organizing school visits, college fairs, whether virtual or on campus, We can also support you by sharing information about the foreign education systems, the different scholarship programs, connecting the US and foreign educational institutions in Lebanon. We have also created an amazing cohort of high school counselors, and we have seen that US admission officers do prefer to connect with different counselors in Lebanon as well as students. Whenever you think that we can help you throughout the recruitment, and you want to connect to different local high schools or even local universities, we are happy and glad to support you with that. We have also had so many workshops, and we have offered so many US universities to collaborate with us and prepare workshops and webinars, so you can represent your institution, and different US higher education can represent their institutions to local students as well. For the open doors, we usually release our open doors during the International Education Week, which is happening on November 15th throughout November 19th. But we have seen last year an increase of a 2.2% from Lebanese students going to the US. The majority of students usually go to the US to pursue their master's degree. However, this year we have seen an increase of students going directly after high school due to all the challenges that we have discussed throughout this webinar. We also support students in Lebanon. We do have a competitive college club. This club recruits top talented students in Lebanon. They are usually brilliant students. They have really high scores. They are high achievers, whether in academics or extracurricular activities. We work with these students step by step. We have recruited this year 35 students. We work with them throughout the whole application process, and we help them apply to US universities, hoping for the US universities to provide them with financial aid and even full rides or full scholarships for them to be able to attend the US universities. Usually the competitive college club students, we also call it the CCC club. These are underprivileged students. They are not able to fully finance their education in the US. However, we are very thankful for the generosity of the US institutions for the past 7 years. And we have seen so many great students get admissions and scholarships to attend the US education. Last year, we had 10 students accepted, and they are currently attending their studies in the US. And they have won a total of $10 million to attend the full 4 years of undergraduate studies. So if you are willing to collaborate with us, we would be more than happy to share a webinar with you, or even collaborate on a free webinar that we can discuss different topics that local students can benefit from, as well as a chance for the US higher education to represent their institution.
Thank you, Vanessa. We appreciate that. And I strongly encourage you all to get more involved with Education USA. They really, really are a wonderful part of our community, our international admissions community. So now I'd like to just take a moment to thank all the presenters and all the work that they put into this presentation, Vanessa, Hala, and Annetta, but also close out with a few things from ACRO that we'd like to share with you. So thank you to our presenters. And I did share the link with the PDF in the chat. We are available for questions and answers. So if anybody has any questions, I don't see any in there right now. So I am going to go ahead and talk about these last few things with ACRO, and we'll see if we have any at that point. It's not too early to begin thinking and making your plans for ACRO's annual meeting. It's coming up in April 2022. It will be an in-person event. There will be loads of sessions, and those are inspired by your needs and interests. So we do hope you'll join us. Next slide. Also, we have been working and busy creating the content that you want and need, including the international series. Shout out to Annetta on that. So please visit the on-demand library and find the courses that fit your needs. Next, ACRO will continue our support in providing resources, updates, and tools to assist you with vulnerable and displaced persons. Please check back often and consider the tools listed here. A special note on our series of Education in Crisis, we will have the Afghanistan webinar, which will take place on December 9th. That registration site is coming soon, so stay tuned. Next, we have lots of ways for you to stay informed with us at ACRO. We have an updated listserv that's been rolled out. And so if you would like, there's how you can go in and paste that link in and join this listserv, or rejoin or join for the first time, whichever works for you. Also, if you are an EDGE subscriber, you will find a link to join that listserv at the bottom of each page. Also, we have an EDGE users group. For those of you subscribing to EDGE, we have a monthly user group where we meet to discuss updates to EDGE and to address your questions, whatever they might be. And then finally, because you are members and our colleagues are our most valued resource, we'd also just like to give a shout out to the Gloria Nathanson Fund, which is really always looking for substantive contributions to the fields of international ed. And so please consider what you'd like to research for this fund, and hopefully we could help defray some of those costs with some of our awards. So reach out to us at any point in time for that. And finally, just a last thank you to all of you for joining us and being willing to be here. As always, we're available to you, and you can access us anytime, day or night, regardless of where you are in the world, at www.acro.org. And I am looking and I still don't see any questions. So with that, we are just about the top of the hour. Thank you all, and we're here for you.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.